Welcome to today's class on movies, montage, and cultural criticism, story making on the silver screen. Let's get started. So we're going to begin with montage theory. This is a photograph of Anne Bawkins, who is the first woman ever to win an Oscar for editing. She worked on lots of super famous films, and she won an Oscar quite early on in film history, which is why we have black and white photos of her. So montage theory is basically the idea that 1 + 1 = 3. This theory was made famous by Soviet directors Lev Kuleshov and Sergei Eisenstein. I did not choose this theory because it was made famous by Russians. In fact, this theory was chosen for you by Mr. Safin. I asked him, what film theory should I cover in the movies section of this course? And he said, probably montage theory. If you're just going to do one, do montage theory. And I said, okay. Battleship Potemkin is the famous film that Lev Kuleshov made. And really this theory comes out of Soviet era filmmaking. American filmmaking was not particularly using this style at that time, but it is now widely used around the world in all sorts of films, and you will see why in a moment, I think. So here's the basic idea of the theory. It's not the content of the film that most affects the viewer, but the relationship between the shots. Now this might not make sense, but right now, but we're going to try a little experiment and see if we can make it make more sense to us. Kuleshov ran experiments to prove this, and we're going to try to replicate some of his experiments in a moment. And I misspoke before. I think it's Eisenstein directed Battleship Potemkin. Okay, so what is this man feeling? What do you think? Just whatever comes into your head first. Now, if the next shot is this, if we go from his face to this, what is implied is that he is looking at that, right? So if we see his face and then we see this shot of a little girl in a casket, what do you think he's feeling? What if instead we see this man's face and then the next shot is a bowl of soup? What do you think he was feeling? What if we see this man's face and then the next shot is a woman lounging on a chaise? It's the same shot of the man in each of these three things, but Kuleshov's experiment was to edit film shots together in different ways. And he showed, for instance, this shot of this man immediately before a shot of these three different things, among others, and then had the audience write down what the man was feeling. And they wrote down wildly different things depending on what the object was immediately following the image of the man. And the reason this happens is because we assume that there is a relationship between one shot and the next shot. If there isn't, it's just chaos and we don't like it. It's not a film that we like watching typically because we can't follow it. It doesn't make any sense. So if a film is telling a story and it's making sense, there should be some sort of relationship between one shot and another. We assume that if we're looking at a man looking forward and then we see an object, that the man is seeing the object, right? And that there's some relationship between the man's appearance and his facial expression and the object, and that we've seen the man's reaction to the object, right? And so in film, editing is everything. People create meaning from the order of the shots, and the way that you arrange them matters monumentally. This is a special property of film that affects how people understand what is going on. It's a thing that you can do in film that you can't do with other media because you don't have the control over other media in the same kind of way. You can't edit other media in the same sort of way. So this is montage theory, that the order of the shots matters in how people feel about what is happening and how they respond to it. So this is one special property of movies or films. I want you to take a brief moment and think about some of the other special characteristics of movies. What are the characteristics of movies as a form of media? What sorts of communication are they particularly good at, and what are they not very good at? For example, you definitely can't break up with somebody by making a film for them. Terrible way to break up with somebody. And it takes a long time to make a movie, so they're not very good at like anything that you need to communicate quickly, right? They also cost a lot. What challenges does the movie industry face? Maybe particularly now that movie theaters are closed. What strengths can the movie industry draw on as they face these challenges? So we're now going to talk about cultural criticism, which is a way of kind of unpacking or looking into what is going on in movies and why movies can matter to our culture and society. Here is a short series of stills from Ant-Man. Are we the good guys? We're the good guys, right? Yeah, we're the good guys. Feels kind of weird, you know? That will become relevant in a moment. So cultural criticism asks three major questions. The first major question is, what meanings are being made in this form of media? And we're applying cultural criticism today to movies or film. Stuart Hall, who was a very famous cultural critic, defined culture in this way. To say that two people belong to the same culture is to say that they interpret the world in roughly the same ways. So it's a way of understanding things in the same way, or interpreting things in the same way, to have the same set of meanings, right? We can think about, to think back to talking about shared symbols and shared fantasies. We watched Remember the Titans, the speech from Coach Boone, right? And the way that creating shared fantasies and shared symbols and creating symbolic convergence helped to make a group feel more close to each other because they had some ways of understanding each other, right? We talked about how it can decrease people's uncertainty about each other and make them feel more comfortable together when they had shared meanings and shared ways of understanding things. This is along those same kinds of lines, that when people have the same ways to understand the world, the same kinds of meanings that they can make together, we can say that they're in the same cultural group. So we have different sizes of cultural groups, right? We have, the cultural group of maybe American, which is a very big group, of kind of Western PA and Ohio and Northwestern Maryland as a kind of region. We have St. Vincent College as a kind of cultural group. You have your pod, right? We have our class. You have your pod, you have your friends, you have your clubs and activities and teams, and all of these are different kinds of cultural groups. So culture can be a big kind of group, a small kind of group, and it's an elastic kind of term in that way. But when we're talking about media, we tend to think about media in kind of larger pieces, especially something like a movie, because a movie takes a long time to make and is very expensive typically, and so tends to be made for pretty large cultures or things called culture that are pretty large groups. So we're looking at what interpretations or meanings are presented as normal. What is the normal way to have meaning about this? What are the normal meanings and what are the weird meanings? What are the things taken for granted? And what are the things that you have to stop and think about? The second question that cultural criticism asks is, what discursive formations are common in this media? Discursive formations are basically the definition of what is normal or abnormal, and then how to act towards what is abnormal. It defines who is in and who is out of a group and what the cultural norms are. So basically, a discursive formation, even though the words that are in this phrase don't seem to have anything to do with all the rest of these things. Discursive formation is a definition of who is cool and who isn't, and what you do to the people who aren't cool. Who is okay and who is not okay, and what you do to the people who are not okay. Who is safe and who is unsafe, and what do we do with the people who are unsafe? And how do you know? What are the markers? How do you tell if somebody's uncool or unsafe? Is it their clothing? Is it their accent? Is it where they live? Is it particular behaviors? Is it their job? Is it the kind of car they drive? What are the things that let you know whether a person is in the cool group, the normal group, the okay group, and when that person is not? And what you're supposed to do if they're not. These are discursive formations. The third question that cultural criticism asks is, what prototypes does the media present? Prototypes are basically the ideal way to behave. This is done in several different ways. There are commonly represented groups, so the people who are usually or kind of default the main characters, the people who have power, the people who were always in all of the shows, and then how members of that group typically behave. What are the things that they do? What are the kinds of clothes that they wear? What are the kinds of cars that they drive? Where do they live? What kind of life do they lead? What is defined as good and bad behavior in the well-represented groups versus the not well-represented groups? And when a group is not well represented, is there an explanation given for that? So we can use, we as the audience for these shows or these films can respond to these depictions, these media messages about how we should behave, about who we should try to be, the prototype of a person that we should try to be, the cultural norms that we should try to follow. We can respond to these messages in three major ways. We can decode them, if we remember back to the SMR media model, where we encode a message and we send it. Well, the filmmakers are encoding a message, sending it through a channel, which would be the film, to a receiver who is us, and then we have to decode it, right? So we have three major ways that we can go about doing this. The first is that we can operate inside the dominant code, which is to say, yep, okay, I accept and agree with your message. You are correct. This is how the world is. We can apply a negotiable code, which is to say that this is more or less how the world is, but it's not like this all the time. Or it's like this except in some cases. Or this is right except about this particular thing. So it's a kind of yes, but response. Or we can substitute an oppositional code, which is to say, no, this isn't true, and I am going to, in fact, replace your message with a different one, which is that there is something else going on. So you can replace your own code, or you can replace the code that's there with your own code instead, and say, this is an example of everything that's wrong with the world, for instance. Rather than agreeing with the film and discursive formations that the film is offering. So you have three paths or three options when decoding a message in a piece of media, including a film. So we're going to try this out. I have given you links to 3 film trailers in the on the page for today, and I would like you to choose, well, to watch each of those 3 and reply what meanings are made in each, what discursive formations do you see, what prototypes are presented, and which decoding path did you take for each of the 3 of them. And I am going to, we are going to turn in your answers to these as the response activity for today, the engagement activity for today, and you'll get to try out using cultural criticism for on these movie trailers and see what different things you notice about these films. All right, so that takes us to the end of the recording for today. I just need to remind you about homework. We have 3 things for you to do. Number 1, make a data viz of your movie tracking, which you should have been keeping track of since last class period. Write a 100 to 250 word reflection about it. Turn it in by midnight tonight. You know the drill by now. 2, read the excerpt from the plug-in drug, which is in this week's folder. That is, we are not reading a chapter from the textbook about TV. You're welcome to read it if you would like to, but we're going to read a research study about TV instead. So you're going to read it, a book chapter about TV. So do that, and then 3, keep doing your media fast. You need to do it until next class period, and maybe flip open that media fast report again and make sure you're keeping notes on the right things so that you can write the report up without, so you can write the report up and have the right information for doing that. So if you have any questions about these things, as always, you can let me know and I will do my best to help you out. Otherwise, I will see you next class and have a lovely day. Bye.